Ati hei mauri ara kia tātou. Ati hei uri uri te hei nako nako kātou. Kātou haha te rangi e tū nei. Kātou haha te papa e hora nei. Kātou te mātuku mai raro tonga. Koi ia iruku hia manawa pauroto. Koi ia iruku hia manawa pauwaho. Whakatīna kia tīna. Tēnā. Te more i tipu mai Hawaiki. E pupu ana hoki. E wāwā ana hoki. Tārewa tū ki te rangi aua kia eke tanuku, kia eke tangaroa, pāno haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. I runga tonu e ngā tīmatanga kōrero, ko ngā patu e huri nei ki te runga rawa, ko ia tonu kei te api kei te manaaki a tātou, me whakahonore, me whakakroria tōna ingoa tapu. Tū wake anau I runga I te tihi o mauau, ka te tiro ki tua ki ngā puke maunga e pīkau mai ana. Ara a maunga tuki. Ara a maunga o tāne wainuku. Ara a pū whenua. Titi rata ki rata e te rohe o Waikato. Tā tainui waka. Ko maunga tautari tērā. Ko te awa Waikato e rere ana ki taupiri maunga. E mihi nei ki tō tātou ari kinui. Nei rā tō tātou mokopuna. I runga I ōna mōhiatanga māramatanga I raru I tā hurewa tapu o nā mātu o nā tūpuna. Nei rā, ka nui te mihi, I runga te tuatahi ki tōna matu a kingi tū hei tia pōtatau te pirapira o te tuapitu. E huri nei ōna tōna kanohi ki tua, e hoki nei ki te wākainga. Nō reira, e mihi nei kia ngā wai hua I te pōtatau te pirapira o te tū āwaru. Nei rā, I runga I tōna tūranga, ko tātou tēnei inui atu na ki aia I runga I te taimahatanga ko taumai ki runga I ai te wehenga ngātu o tōna matua. Nō reira, tōna paia āta pai, te whānau katoa hoki, I roto I te pare o pōtatau, e me kiake ki a rātou, rire hau, pai mārire ki a rātou. Nei rā mihi nei, ki tō tātou pare e tū nei, te pare karakia e tū nei. Ki ngā pononga o tēnei pare, karakia e mihi nei kia koutou, ko tau nei, mō tō mātou whakahaere neke hanga o tēnei pō I runga I te kaumata. O tuhia nei, te Tatau Pounamu, nei rā, tō tātou rangatira e noho nei ki a koe tākuta. Alistair, ngā mihi nui. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, e whai kaha nei ki te pupuri, ki te pai ngā kore o te ao tapito. He oranga mō tātou katoa I roto I te moana o Tauranga. Nō reira, kia koutou katoa, ngā manuhiri ko tau mai tēnei pō, ngā mātā waka o koutou, nau mai hara mai ki roto I te moana o Tauranga. Nei rā ngā karanga iwi ko ngā tipūkenga, ko ngā I te rangi me ngā tirangi nui, e mihi nei kia koutou ko tau mai tēnei rā. I runga I te whakaaroa nui e huri nei ki te kaupapa e tau nei. Ana ko tātou tēnei ko tā mai katoa, ki te whakarongo o tātou, ki te rongo o tātou taringa ki ngā kōrero o tō tātou rangatira I tēnei pō. Nō reira, kei aia te mauri, kei aia ngā tikanga, hei oranga mō tātou katoa, mō Tauranga mōna, mō te motu hoki. Mō te motu hoki. Nei rā ko tātou tēnei ko taumai, I raro I te manaakitanga o te hāhi o tēnei whare, I runga I te hūmārie, te ngā kaunui e whai aki ana ko te wairua, hei api, hei manaaki a tātou katoa I roto I tō tātou whare. Nō reira, e mihi nei kia koutou kia tātou katoa, ko taumai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, a kia ora tātou katoa. Am I meant to sing a waira here? Tai ake. Pēhā, Alistair. Kei te pai. Taku wairua ora nei, tupu tapu ki nā nei Au e te mataku kare, ka mata au kare, ka mata au karu, ka te iau karu, ka te iau karu, ka te iau
Kia ora tātou katoa, wheskarma e ahule dunya. Everybody say kia ora. Kia ora e karema. Oh my goodness, my name is Lillian Murray, and I have the happy positionality of being friends with both of the hosts of the hosts of tonight's both of the hosts of this kōrero tonight. That is to say, I've been a fellow with the Venn Foundation, and I volunteer with Karuwhā Trust. But as a way of connection, I'd really love to just come out and brag that I was born here in Tauranga Hospital, and spent the first 2 years of my life in Papamoa, and was raised by the town of Te Puke. And so indeed it's a beautiful thing to be back here, for indeed the confession is that I now live up in Tāmaki Makaurau. But it's a beautiful thing to be hosted here at Holy Trinity. So tēnā koutou, and matua tamati tēnā koe for your opening of us so well and so richly and so generously to our matua. To zoom in again, I want to say that the joy of tonight is that we're going to be listening to a kōrero from a necessarily different perspective. Indeed, Matua Alistair is a historian, and we need that tonight. He brings that with him tonight, of course. But he's also a public theologian and a farmer. And I emphasise those two things as well, because we really need those. Now, I'm wearing a really cool Swan Dry blue shirt here, but that's about the extent of my physicality. I'm quite indoors, I'm quite a city gal. Even when I was in Te Puke, I was quite a townie. And so I like the symbolism, I appreciate it keenly, because Matua Alistair is out there on the farm, physicalizing what he needs to do. Indeed, I see him do that as well with his understanding of te tiriti. It's like he doesn't just understand it, he doesn't just love it with a feeling, he is able to work it out somehow in some ways. Indeed, behind the scenes, our Matua Alistair is knocking on doors. He's writing letters and emails to power holders. He's turning up to iwi meetings year after year, decade after decade. He's calling for meetings amongst our own people to teach the history of the land, to teach and suggest about stewarding and resources and even returning resources as the Treaty Covenant would compel him to. In fact, it's some of his living it out that he's arrived at some of these insights. Often I get confused. I think, I need to understand it before I can live it out. Indeed, he's walked in step in some really faithful ways, lived it out and come to articulate some of his insights. There has already been te reo Māori spoken without any translation, and I do expect that will happen again. And of course, please note that the heart of that is never about exclusion and always about supporting te reo Māori and normalising te reo Māori, of course. But in the spirit of say, te wiki o te reo Māori, we'll do a spot of learning together. I'd love to empower you with some words that our Matua Alistair often uses. So, whenever he says rongopai, everybody say rongopai, he means the good news or the gospel. Whenever he says te atua, everybody say te atua. Well, he's meaning God. Everybody say take. By that he means an issue. Something with a bit of weight to it often, a bit of an issue, a bit of a take. Everybody say ka wanatanga. He means the government. Ka wanatanga, government. Transliteration there. Everybody say tangi. Often translated as a call or even a cry or even a wail, tangi. Everybody say kawenata? Kawenata, covenant. Kawenata, covenant. And spot the odd word out, everybody say providence. Providence, ka pai. When he uses this word, he refers to the mystery of God's divine involvement in something. In other words, God is involved. In other words, what? God is involved. Providence, ka pai, ka pai. All right, well, that's about me. The quote that we'll have our brother Koro to come up and offer is a quote that was articulated first by Sir Hare Williams, who was awarded a knighthood for services to Māori, to literature and to education. And I do note that the languaging in this quote is, it uses the languaging exclusively of Māori and Pākehā. And if you feel that you don't identify with either of those two identifiers, please know of your specific stake in this kōrero too. Please feel very welcome here in knowing your place here in this wider kōrero as it unfolds. And so I invite our brother Koro up to share his quote. Mauri ora.
Kia ora tātou. Uncle Thomas honoured me to do karakia to kick us off. Kia inoi tātou, let us pray. I noinga tēnei ki te wairua tapu kia tukunei ho tōna māramatanga ki runga i a tātou katoa. I te ingoa te matua te tamaiti me te wairua tapu āmene. Haere mai e te wairua tapu, haere mai whakakia ngā ko au tāngata whakapono. Whakauria i roto i a rātou te kāporo tō aroha. Tōnua mai tau wairuakanga hauti o mātou ngākau, kahua nōki e te mato o te whenua. Pater noster, qui es in celi, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum. Fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis udie, et dimite nobis debita nostra. Sicut et nos dimitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, se libera nos a malo. Amen. Te ingoa te matua, te tamaiti me te wairua tapu, āmene. That's out of the way, ka pai. Also have it, just going off script again, just like our late king always used to do. Higher authority told me to make sure you all have a cup of tea after, because someone's been up all night baking last night, so eat those biscuits, please, so you don't have to take them home. Okay, back to the kaupapa. Sir Harry Williams. Ko te Treaty of Waitangi, te kawenata mo tō tātou motu Aotearoa. He kawenata whakahirahira, e tautoko ana I te noho ko tahitanga a te Māori me te Pākehā. The treaty is the covenant for our land of Aotearoa. A magnificent covenant which supports the unity of Māori and Pākehā. Wow. Ka au tonu tōna mana me ona puā waitanga, rangatiratanga, whakaritenga, kaitiakitanga, mahitahi, me te ngākau mahaki. Its mana and its provisions will endure. Autonomy, protocols, stewardship, unity, and humility. Ko te Māori me te Pākehā noho e mahitahi ana mo ngā tāngata katoa. Māori and Pākehā working together for the benefit of all. Kia ora. Have a cup of tea.
Tēnā koutou. This is the piece of scripture that Matua Alistair was asked to reflect on when writing his koho for Waitangi this year. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments.
He honere, he karore ki te atua, mā ngā rongo ki te whenua whakarapai ki ngā tangata katoa. Glory to God, peace on earth, and goodwill to you all. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki tō mātou e te rangi e pā, he mihi whakawhetai tēnei ki a koe mō tēnei huhuenga e tēnei pō. Father, we're just grateful to you for being with us here tonight. Takatimu waka, patātua waka, tāhi kā ki konei, nai tamarawaho, e te rangatira tēnā koe mō tō Manakitanga ki a mātou, ki a tātou e tēnei wā. Rangatira mā, kui mā. Nā te ranganui mā Ngāti Pukenga. Ko tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa kua tai mai ki konei. Ngā mātā waka I wanganui a tātou. The different waka that are with us tonight. Tangata Pacifica, tuakana mā. Nā tangata tiriti hoki, okuhoa, people of the treaty, manga hau e whā, all of you, from wherever you have come from. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I am amazed and thrilled that you would come here tonight, and as I need to remind myself again, as my daughter says, it's not about you, Dad, it's about the kaupapa. I also want to make a special mihi. There may be some tonight who see things completely different than me. I want to make a special mihi to you tonight. No mai hare mai, whakatau mai I wanganui a tātou, because we long to sit around the table together. As Lillian has said, I use this word take. Take means an issue or a thing. I need to preface tonight by saying, actually, this is a big take that we've got. So I invite you, almost like wānanga style, if you need to have a moi in the midst of it, kei te pai tēnā, that's okay, you know, because actually we need to take some time on this, and I'm asking for your patience with me that I can unpack some things. And I appreciate that we've actually got some really lovely seats to sit in. They're really comfortable, and just, you know, cuddle up and we'll unfold this take nui, this big take. So I appreciate you again for being here. So I was invited to speak at Waitangi this year, and I had been to the Huia Motu just previously with Kingi Tuheitia, and Archbishop Don Tamaheri stole my words. Actually, he quoted from Tina Turner, and he said, "What has love got to do with it?" Actually, that was already in my speech prepared, but he nicked it beforehand. And so I had to stand up and sort of, you know, like it was plagiarism when I stood up at Waitangi, and to say, what has love got to do with it? But I asked the question in the light of this extraordinary verse that has been read out to us. Because if we are genuinely people who seek to do what is right, we are called to love our enemies. And so I have to ask the question, what has love got to do with realpolitik? Or what has love got to do with the treaty? And it's something that is not normally associated with things like politics and the Treaty of Waitangi. But it absolutely blew me away when I was actually looking at the story of Waitangi. I didn't actually know that it's actually a love story. Te ana a maikuku. It actually talks, this Waitangi story originally, about a love story between two people, Maikuku and Huatakaroa. Maikuku was this beautiful maiden, and she'd been hidden in a cave by her family because she wanted to keep young teenage boys from, you know, going after her. Anyway, she's in this cave, deep within this cave, and eventually I guess she gets a bit hoha with being in that cave, and she begins to tangi. And there's this tangi that comes out of this watery cave, and Huatakaroa, this young man, this toa, he comes along and he ends up finding her deep within the watery cave, and the rest, they say, is history. And they got together, and out of this love story they produce actually a whole new hapu. So Waitangi is actually beginning as a love story. But if we fast forward many centuries, at the time when my ancestors began to arrive in this land, in the early part of the 1800s, it became a contested land. My eponymous ancestor, Alexander, he came from Glasgow. At 11 years old, he was living and working in Glasgow and in a steel factory, without hope, without any opportunity and advancement. And he responded with his family to all the advertisements that says, come to Aotearoa. There is land aplenty as far as the eye can see, and it's for you. So this was what my ancestors came in pursuit of, the Pūtake o Te Rere, it's called. However, alongside my ancestors, there were many others that came, and they had absolutely no respect for the law that was in the land at that time. And so the land became contested because you have these lawbreakers, these drunken syphilitic sailors that were coming without respect for what was happening in the land. And so there was another tangi that arose in the north. And the rangatira of Ngāpuhi especially began to express their dissatisfaction with the settlers that were coming in, and they wrote letters back to King William. And they asked for protection from King William for the French who were threatening to come in and for the troublesome and vicious settlers. This was mediated and signed by William Yate, who was the Church Missionary Society person at the time. And you will hear a lot about the Church Missionary Society tonight, because that's a particular slant that I'm bringing to the story. And so in response to that letter, the Crown brought out this man called James Busby. Unfortunately, James Busby, who became the British resident, he was invited to represent the British Crown amongst the troublesome settlers, but he was a man without guns. And so there was really little response on behalf of the European settlers to his presence in the north. However, there were a couple of things that Busby helped to facilitate in conjunction with Northern Rangatira. And the first one is He Whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence, which was signed in 1835. This He Whakaputanga, or Te Tino Rangatiratanga o New Terene, is a very important document that's probably underemphasised in our land. But the Ngāpuhi call that the tuakana, and they say that this is the one that actually prefigures the treaty. It's the older brother or the older sister to the treaty, and what they would suggest is that we can't understand fully about the Treaty of Waitangi unless we understand about He Whakaputanga. That's a story for another day. However, anyway, that was signed in 1835 in, again, an attempt to bring some order into the north among the European settlers. But also one of the main things that this He Whakaputanga did was it actually acknowledged New Zealand as a sovereign, independent, autonomous nation under the rulership of Rangatira. So that happened, but unfortunately, as I said, he was a man without guns, this Busby, and the British settlers took no notice of him. And so they continued to pour in, and the tangi from the north continued to spread back to the Crown, and the tangi kept saying, something needs to be done about your people who are causing all this trouble in our land. And so as a result of that, we have these places like Kororareka, Russell, we call it today. It's a place where Satan maintained his dominion without molestation. So that's where alcohol reigned, that's where syphilis reigned, that's where violence reigned, that's where lawlessness reigned. And that was what the tangi in the north was all about, the tangi that went back to the Crown in England saying, come and do even more about your people. The other side actor in the midst of that was the New Zealand Company. This was the one that was organising a very overt colonisation process in New Zealand, and they were facilitating an entrance into the land for the land's sake. So the Crown in England actually responded to this tangi, and eventually in 1840 they sent Lieutenant Governor Hobson, and we will all know that on the 5th and the 6th of February 1840, Hobson created and facilitated the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. I want to suggest first up that the treaty is actually a protocol of reconciliation. Why do I say that? Because it was an attempt in the creation of this protocol to bring peace between two contesting parties. It was an attempt to establish a protocol by which two autonomous peoples could live together. So that's at its core, that is what, in my view, the treaty is. It's a protocol of reconciliation. So this was unfolding in Waitangi in 1840, February the 5th and February the 6th. And as we know, many of the rangatira, they signed that. And at that place, one of the rangatira was this man called Ngā Manu. Ngā Manu signed the Treaty of Waitangi. And after he had signed, he stands and he makes karakia. And he says, Hare mai e te tiriti o Waitangi. Hare mai ki tēnei ao. Hare mai me ngā hua kei rautu ki a koe. Noho mai ki tō mātautaha. Tū mai ki tō mahataha. Takiri anu ku takiri ārangi. Ta manawa ti, ta manawa tā tēnei te karikau te kariaro tō e. Karakia, invoking the presence of the atua, I roto e te whenua, I roto e te papa ki reira, establishing something of the sacred nature of that which was being signed. The key line of that karakia for me from Ngā Manu is this: he's saying, welcome to the fruits that are within you, O tiriti of tiriti of Waitangi. He is praying, welcome, that the fruits that are within you would flourish within our midst. So in 1840, it was a high point. This tikanga of reconciliation was signed. However, it wasn't long before this protocol was broken. Judge Prendergast, for example, in 1877, ruled that the treaty was a simple nullity. What he said was that Māori were primitive barbarians, they were savages, they were not in a position to enter into a treaty with a sovereign nation like England. And so the treaty fell, as it were, onto the ground within our legislative places. In 1908, this is a picture of what the treaty physically looked like. One of the treaty documents that had been signed lay in the basement of the National Library. It was water damaged, it had been rat-eaten, laying almost forgotten in this basement. I look at this in a sense like a tohu. This was a sign, as it were, of the condition of this treaty that had started off with so much hope all those years before, now ended up in a basement. Not only that, this is the house where the treaty was signed in 1840. This is the house of Busby, the British resident. It was once a fine house. By the 1930s, the house where the treaty was signed had fallen into ruin. It was situated on a farm that had been purchased by Pākehā and had also had fallen into ruin. Providentially, in 1932, New Zealand had a Governor-General. His name was Lord Bledisloe, and he was taken to Waitangi. He arrived at Waitangi and he saw this broken down cottage and he saw this land that had fallen almost into disrepair. And something in him moved and he decided to purchase the land. He purchased the land and then he gifted it back to the nation. Why did he take such a step? I believe he was moved providentially because he understood the reconciliatory nature of the treaty in the past, in his present, and for the future. So in 1932, this transaction happened, and then 2 years later, he returned to Waitangi. And it was there that he was about to make his official presentation of the land. But here's an interesting story. In January, prior to his arrival in Waitangi, he went to Motueka and he visited with Te Atiawa Te Waka a Maui. And he told them about what he was going to do at Waitangi, gifting the land. At that occasion, Te Atiawa, Te Waka o Maui, presented him with a pounamu. It was a special type of pounamu, a special type of greenstone. It was called tangiwai. That's the type of greenstone that it was. And if you can go up to Waitangi now, you'll see that piece of greenstone sitting in the turu, in the chair actually, that was also gifted at the time. A tangiwai for Waitangi. However, I believe that he also received something more from Te Atiawa at that time. Because when he stood and he made the presentation in 1934, this is what he said. Let Waitangi be to us all a Tatau Pounamu, a symbol of peace and reconciliation. I believe that Te Atiawa gifted him some Tauranga Māori. This is an idea, Tatau Pounamu, which simply means the doorway of reconciliation or a protocol of reconciliation. What Te Atiawa is saying, Governor, what you are doing is actually you are facilitating a return to a state of reconciliation by giving the nation back its treasure, the treasure of the place of Waitangi, the tiriti of Waitangi. Bishop Frederick Bennett, who was at his side, prayed this: O God, grant that the sacred compact here made in these waters may be faithfully and honourably kept for all time to come. This was a prayer of the Governor-General's. I don't know whether it was accidental or providential, but there were three main pou that he designated there. One, it's tapu. It's sacred. Secondly, it's enduring. It's not just a contract that can be renegotiated. It's something that stands. And the other thing he finally said in the midst of this prayer, it needs to be honoured. Wonderful. 1934 moves to 1940. And at that time, they had decided to build a wharenui. And that was the wharewananga that stands at Waitangi at the moment. And if you go there, you see Busby's house that's restored, and on its side, you see the wharerunanga there. And a man called Se Aperana Ngata was the man who oversaw the design and the carvings within that. When Sir Aperana Ngata officially opened that, he stood with all the toa behind him, and he stands and he says, Kamate, kamate, ka ora, and he does the tiropira aha haka. It was dead, but now it lives, and now it lives. I believe that's what Ngata was actually saying. Ngata was in a difficult situation. Some of you might know that story, but one of the things he wrote at that time was, I do not know of any year the Māori people have approached with so much misgiving as the centennial year. In retrospect, what does the Māori see 100 years later? Lands gone, the power of chiefs humbled in the dust, Māori culture scattered and broken. So on one hand, Ngata was representing the crown, but on the other hand, privately and with his people, he was mourning what was the true condition of his people at that situation. But it marks a turning point, I believe, in our land. It was, in some sense, a time when Pākehā were invited back to the table and they were reminded of this protocol of reconciliation. I talk tonight of reconciliation, but my friend in Australia, an Aboriginal friend, says to me, you know, when we in Australia talk of reconciliation, I call it reconciliation. And one of the things I want to say tonight is we will talk of some things about reconciliation, but we don't want it to be silly. We don't want it to be cheap. There is a cost to this reconciliation. And that's one of the things that we will talk about as we go forward. So as I propose reconciliation, it is not just a once light over easy thing. For me, I've been in this take, this kaupapa for, 20 or 30 years, short time. I'm a Johnny come lately. Some of you are probably Johnny a come later. I'm talking about my Pākehā friends. And immediately we wanting to pronounce what it's all about. What I want to invite my people into is come and know what it is first before we actually launch into knowing what it says. Let's understand something about its nature and how it is before we actually go into the exegesis. And so that's, in a sense, my appeal to you tonight. My wife, Jeannie, she's in the back with my moko somewhere, I think. She's from Saskatchewan. That's the plains of Canada. And that's in a place where they say, don't worry about if you lose your dog, you can still see it after 3 days. Anyway, in Canada, they have a treaty commissioner for every province that oversees the treaties. Hey, that was quite good, eh? I'm not really funny. People say, you're not funny at all, are you? And I agree with them. Anyway, yes, if you come for a laugh, you've come to the wrong place. Anyway, I was thrilled to discover that the treaty commissioner in Saskatoon, he said this: in order to implement the treaty relationship and fulfill the promise of the treaties, there needs to be revitalization based upon 4 pillars of reconciliation: political, legal, socio-economic, and spiritual. I want to suggest that we've been quite good at doing some of those, but not all of them. And it reminds me of Sir Mason Jury's Whare Tapawhā. Many of you will be familiar with the Whare Tapawhā, which talks about what is it that an individual, an institution, or a family needs in order to be able to have well-being. Their tinana, their henengaro, their whānau, their wairua, those 4 things, they need to be all nurtured in order that we have some holistic health. Actually, someone has also added taha whenua, which means that we need to understand the cultural presence or the cultural identity of our people as well in order to have this holistic well-being. What I'm wanting to suggest about the treaty is, again, know what it is. And one of the things is it's actually holistic. It contains all of these aspects to it. And so this is e tino hohono tēnei. It's really deep. It's not something that you can just come at and lightly sort of read the book or read the page and then, oh, that's it there. So we need to understand the culture. If we wanted to understand something about it, what it is, we need to understand the cultures that are involved in the process of the treaty making. So the Crown will have its own culture, and they have created their own language around the treaty. Te Ao Māori will have its own tikanga around te tiriti, and one of the things that they talk about is its tapu nature, for example. Professor Paul Moon, with whom I agree and disagree on several issues, wrote this: since 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal has been primarily responsible, along with the courts, the politicians and academics, for interpreting the meaning and the application of the Treaty of Waitangi. Interestingly enough, that Professor Paul Moon has neglected to actually talk about the church. The church is an absent voice, even though, as I stated, there were 3 voices at the treaty table: the Crown, Te iwi Māori, rangatira Māori, and the church as the mediator of te tiriti. And I know that for some this will be an unpopular truth. Claudia Orange says the treaty was simply secured because many Māori trusted the missionaries' good intentions. And she goes on to say the role of the English missionary in determining Māori understanding was crucial. In blank terms, what Claudia is saying is that without the church, without the missionaries, it would have been something completely different. There is a relational whakapapa to the treaty, particularly ngā puhi rangatira and the Church Missionary Society, and that's particularly Williams and Marston, who had entered into a relationship with Ruatara and Hangihika. There was a relationship between Rangi Hauā, where Te Rongopai landed, and where this Church Missionary Society set up their place in Paihia. And then as the Church Missionary Society became the intermediaries in the letters back to the Crown. Can I say quite a strong statement, and I'm willing to talk about it later with others. The gospel has helped shape the treaty. If it wasn't for the gospel at Rangi Hauā, the treaty would have been very different. There might have been one, but it wouldn't have been what we've got today. So my thesis in this particular part of the kōrero is that the treaty is a political document, it's a cultural document, but it's also a theological document. How did it get what I call a biblical tikanga in the midst of Te Treaty of Waitangi? In my view, it starts with what we call the Wesleyan revival. But the most central point of it is, and again I use this providential thing that somehow, and it's a mystery, that God's involved. There was this man called Sir James Stephen, and he was the Under-Secretary of the Colonial Office and chiefly responsible for shaping the treaty that was different than the treaties that had gone previously. Sir James Stephen was the step-nephew of Wilberforce, and he had been with Wilberforce in the anti-slavery movement. And it was that ethos that influenced his perspective upon issuing a treaty with Indigenous peoples. And he desired something different than had gone before. So that's something of what I would call the biblical tikanga that helped shape and form the treaty. Now we have it. There is an elephant in the room. We cannot talk about the church without talking about colonization. We cannot talk about the church without talking about the imperial project. And what I want to do tonight is quite a difficult dance. In 1766, there was a matakiti. His name was Toiroa Ikariki, Ngāti Kahangungu. And he said to his people, there is a new tribe coming. Ko te ingoa tō rātau atua, ko te tamei roro kutia, he atua pai o te rā ka ngarawa no te tangata. He prophesied that there was a new people coming. They are bringing with them the name of their God who was killed. He was a good God, but the people will still be oppressed. So he prophesied the arrival of a crucified God, but he also indicated that unfortunately the oppression of my people would continue under their presence. The challenge for me as a theologian historian is to separate the message of the rongopai, the good news, from the flawed messengers that carry that. And that's what I'm going to seek to do, and you judge that for yourself of whether I do a good job of that or not. So we need to contextualise things. We need tikanga Māori. It's not my place. We need Crown law. Again, that's not my place. But we need to understand something of the ethos, the theology that helped shape the treaty in the Colonial Office and in the other places that it went through the auspices of some of the Christian participants. So let's ask the question, geographically, where did the treaty land? On the left of that picture we have Karuwhā, Russell, the place where Satan maintains his dominion. In the middle we have Paihia, just over the bay from Karuwhā. That's where the Church Missionary Society was, and then just along the way, the bay around the corner was where Busby set up, the Crown set up their headquarters. Kororareka, where he maintained his dominion. If the treaty had landed in Russell, it's in my view that it could have been shaped much differently, but it landed in Paihia Waitangi. Context, as historians say, is important. What do people say about Waitangi in those days, this place where Busby set up his reign, his house? These are Australians, so this is what they said about him, visiting him. One said, he's a religio-political, self-sufficient young man. Another one says, oh, there's way too many prayers at Waitangi. Another one said, oh, Busby's rather too formal and religious for me. What he's talking about is the context of Waitangi was a religious context. You know, he was no swinging from the chandeliers evangelical Busby, but he was sympathetic to their perspective, and he entertained and received Williams in the Church Missionary Society. So that is the context in which the treaty landed. The other giant figure is this controversial figure called Henry Williams, who was the leader of the Church Missionary Society from 1823 onwards. He was invited by Hobson to translate the treaty. He did that on the 4th of February with his son Edward. But here's this, the key thing is that he not only translated it, but it was his mana, I believe, that the rangatira responded to in terms of their gathering at Waitangi on the 5th and the 6th. It was Henry Williams that read out the document to the assembled rangatira. But not only that, it was Henry Williams that explained to the rangatira what's it all about. This is the intention of the Crown, and this is what this treaty means. So in a way, he was the conduit. It was in his words. It was his words that the rangatira heard when they received the treaty. And of course, there were three important concepts: sovereignty equals kawanatanga, the full and exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands, tino rangatira tanga, and finally the treaty as covenant. Those were the things, I guess you could say, the concepts that he introduced. 5th and 6th, argy-bargy, just before they were about to sign, one man stood up, and he was the bishop of the Catholic missionaries. His name was Jean-Baptiste Pompellier, Frenchman, and he said, "Oi, what about us?" What he was saying was he was afraid that if Māori signed with the British, maybe his people would be sort of put off to one side. So what happened then was that both Hobson and Henry Williams went off into a bit of a huddle. And Williams said to Hobson, "What should we do about this?" And the response of Lieutenant Governor Hobson is interesting. He said this: "If he had come to me earlier, I would have written this into the treaty." Anyway, long story short, they wrote it out, and I'll just read it in English just for the sake of time, because it was actually written in Māori, that he said that the Crown will be the kaitiaki, or they will look after the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Catholics, and also the Ritenga Māori hoki. Means all of the worldview of Māori. We will be, the Crown committed to be the kaitiaki of that. You see some other photos there. A couple of years ago, I got this phone call, and I got a phone call from the uncle of Koro here, and it went like this: "Boy, I'm 70 years old at the time." I'm going, "Oh yeah, yeah." Patrick Nicholas here, and I've got Hui Kakahu Kawe with me, and we're going to deliver a petition, and we want you to help us. I said, "Oh, okay. What's the petition?" And they said, "We want the Crown to honour and support the oral article, or the 4th article, that article which the Crown is committed to being the kaitiaki of that whole realm of whakapono, whichever dimensions you want to call it." So just on that subject, on the 24th of October, I'm the only one left standing. Ahua moki, Des? Yeah, because both Hui Kākahu and Patrika are gone, moi mai rāanga rangatira. So on the 24th, I will go down with a few, and we will stand before the select committee there, and we will present our case. That's a little bit of an aside. So, that presentation, and you're doing great, okay? From this perspective, you're doing really well. From this perspective, the presentation of the gospel was made, and this is the response. Here then is my word to thee, O governor. Sit, stay, thou and the missionaries in the word of God. Remain here with us to be a father for us. So that argy-bargy was going on, and after a while, some rangatira were the ones who won the day, and of course the rest is history. It was signed. But one of my favourite rangatira is a man called Nōpera Panikariao from Te Rarawa. And in April of that same year, the treaty was taken up to Te Rarawa territory. And the night before that they were going to sign, or they were going to propose the signing of the treaty, Panikariao had a meeting with a couple of the missionaries and John Johnson, the colonial surgeon. And the question that he put to them was this: what is the issue of sovereignty? What does sovereignty mean? And so they wānanga into the night, and the next day, Panikariao comes up with this very famous aphorism, and it's this aphorism that is able to convince his fellow chiefs up in the north to sign Te Tiriti. And the aphorism was, and you'll know this, what have we got to say against the governor? The shadow of the land will go to him, but the substance will remain with us. After a night of discussion about what sovereignty meant, he was convinced that actually it didn't mean what some of us think it means today, but actually the substance will remain with Te iwi Māori. And this is for the theologians amongst you. You see, he was a theologian. He was a lay preacher up in the north, Panikariao. And he used this word shadow. And I inquire, where does it come from? Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. There's many references, biblical references to the use of shadow, and one of them is in Hebrews. But the most profound one that we can see here is in Colossians. Jesus is the substance and the law is the shadow. It's my view that what Panikariao was using in this aphorism was a biblical example to show that a shadow is lesser than the substance. The substance is always the greater thing. So he was saying to his rangatira, actually, we are the substance. We are the ones that will actually hold the mana, or continue to hold the mana in the land. And kawanatanga is actually a lesser reality. That's my understanding of what Panikariao was saying. How was the treaty framed by this man? How was the treaty framed as it went up and down the motu? Henry Williams said, "Feeling as I did, the terms of the treaty were a sacred compact between the British government and the chiefs of New Zealand. I was able to speak with confidence as to the integrity and honour of England." It was presented to rangatira by the Crown as a sacred compact. Hone Heke, who was the first to sign, said, "Remain, Governor, a father for us. This is, my friends, is a good thing. It is even as the word of God." So what Heke was saying, he was elevating Te Tiriti to a place equal to Te Paipera Tapu. So this idea of a covenantal ethic, it's actually very common today, and I wanted to spend a few minutes on it because it's being used all the time. Actually, just last month, the Waitangi Tribunal, in its response to the Treaty Principles bill that's meant to be coming up, called it He Kawanata. It's a covenant. It started with Henry Williams, and you'll see there the whole list of the peoples through the histories that have referred to Te Tiriti o Waitangi as He Kawanata. They call it a covenant. Even Dame Cindy Kero calls it a covenant. So we need to ask a deep theological question. What is a covenant? Simply, a covenant is, you'll see it formally written up there, I just want to suggest a covenant is where God is the witness. God's there. And he's a witness who is looking that this covenant would be kept faithfully. Right at the end, they came up, they shook hands on the February the 6th, and we have this famous statement by William Hobson, which is also very controversial. He says, "Hei iwi tahi tātou." We are now one people. That's been used, we are now one people. It's been used in a variety of ways, and I just want to spend a couple of seconds on it. Some of you might have seen recently, there was quite a big article or advertisement in the paper, and it says, "We are all New Zealanders," or "We are one." That's what the other statement says. Actually, my friend Huikakahu, the late Huikakahu, says, "Yeah, but who's one?" I understand the sentiment, and there's a bit to talk about there, but really what it is, I believe, is a misunderstanding of what Hobson was saying. He iwi tahi tātou. Hobson didn't speak Māori. Where did he get that from? It's my view he got that from Henry Williams. Henry Williams, who presented the treaty as covenantal, understood the nature of the identity of two covenant-making parties, Jews and Gentiles, covenantal partners. They retain their autonomy, they retain their independence, but they join together in a covenantal unity. Marriage partners come together in a covenantal unity, but the two partners continue to hold their identity and their autonomy. He wasn't saying we'd be one homogeneous whole. What he was saying is that we are in unity, ko tahitanga I roto e te kawanatanga. I roto e te kawanata. We are one in terms of our unity being brought together by a covenant. So we need to understand that. This is my quick statement on it for those that want to do some research later. There's no need for Article 2 if we're just homogeneous one. You may as well just have Article 3, but that's detail. That's for later. Wānanga deep into the night, eh? So, raru, lots of debate on the 5th and the 6th between the rangatira. Hobson goes back to his boat. He's had enough for the day. Rangatira go to Tatau Rangatira beside Te Ti Marae, down on just beside the Marae Atia there. And they wānanged. They discussed this thing deep into the night on the 5th. But there was another person with them. His name was Henry Williams. Henry Williams wānanged alongside them, and this is one of the things he said, I told them to listen with care. That we the missionaries fully approved of the treaty, and that it was an act of love toward them on part of the Queen, who desired to secure them their property rights and their privileges. He said to them, "This is an act of love from the Queen." In 1860, Kohemarama, the gathering of many of the tribes and many rangatira, one of them, a man from Ngāti Mahanga, Hemi Mātini, said this, again I quote in English, "I was there at Waitangi, and I listened to the love of the Queen, and I then heard about the advantages of the treaty. In 1860, he said, it's a covenant." So I have to ask, what is the nature of this love? In 1978, I was a scrawny young man, just arrived back from 10 years overseas, knowing nothing about this land really. I'd been raised totally ignorant of my history, Jez. And some friends said to me, we're going down to Parihaka, you want to come along? And I said, oh, okay. I didn't know what Parihaka was. Actually, I probably didn't even know what a marae was. We go down there, and I walked into this place, Tinihoa Te Atiawa, and I was greeted by 3 kui who changed my life, Auntie Marge, Auntie Ina, and Auntie Neta. And this Pākehā boy who trampled all over their mana, who didn't know even how to hongi, was welcomed into that house and embraced he tino aroa tēnā. I was taught the nature of true love as these ones embraced me and taught me about how nōre ki te ātau māngaronga ki te whenua whakaro pau ki ngā tangata katoa. It taught me about the journey of reconciliation. Actually, it was them that turned me on to Te Paipera Tapu. I wasn't actually into it at all until these aunties taught me into it. We ask the question, what manner of love is this? Henry Williams, theologian, had 4 choices in his Greek understanding of love. The one he comes up with is agape. It's a different, we only have one word in English, so it's not really good for us, that word, because, you know, it's Hollywood and all that stuff. The agape term is used in the scriptures to talk about Jesus Christ and the kind of love that he had, that he was willing to sacrifice his love for us. It's called sacrificial love. The kind of love that Henry Williams was talking to rangatira about was a sacrificial love. It's a love that's patient. It's a love that's kind. It doesn't dishonour others, and it never fails. In summary, what Williams committed Victoria's representatives to was that they would always seek the highest good for Māori. That was the kind of love that they were committing themselves to. One of my favourite prophetic voices in the land is this man, Moana Jackson, who has also passed on. He said, "The treaty to me has never been about treaty rights. It's always been about the rightness that comes from people accepting their obligations to each other." And that was a profound and, I think, a visionary base upon which to build a country. See, there's synergy. This is not just a Christian perspective. This is a perspective that can be shared right across the board. And so what are these obligations that Moana is talking about? Victoria's expression of love to Māori needs to be an outworking of love to Māori by the Crown. That's what the Crown is committed to. The test of the Crown's love is their fidelity to the faithful honouring of te tiriti. That's how we test it. The high point, 1840. The love of the Crown. One of my favourite prophetic voices of the North was Ruki Kaweti. He had a dream. He says, "My illustrious warriors, I fought with God last night, but I did not die." He said, "Trample anger beneath your feet, hold fast to your beliefs, learn the ways of Pākehā, but you must wait until the sandfly," that's the metaphor for Pākehā, "wait until the Pākehā nips the pages of the book of the treaty, and only then will you stand to challenge what has happened, lest you desecrate the sacred signatures of your ancestors placed upon the book." What Kaweti was saying is, let us not be the people who break the covenant. Let them be the people who break the covenant. Panekariau's aphorism quickly changed. He said, "Nah, now the shadow of the land is ours, and the substance goes with them." Henry Williams says, "I am grieved beyond the power of expression." He was grieved because he saw the betrayal. "I am grieved beyond expression because it either never happened or it is now broken." Wirimi Tamihana said this. He wrote to Queen Victoria, "Madam," he said, "your covenant came to this island and you said in good faith that the Māoris should retain their chieftainship, their mana and their lands. These are your declarations. And now, O Mother, assert your authority, the authority which has been trampled on by Governor Grey, and give us back our land, our chieftainship and our mana of which the colonists and the governor are seeking to deprive us." It's pretty clear. I have to ask the question, where was the third voice at the treaty table during these times? There were some prophetic voices, Octavius Hatfield, Sir William Martin. But I ask the question, where was the church when Cameron crossed the Mangatawhiri? Where was the church at Rangarere, Rangiawhia and Ōrākau? Where was the church at Pukahina and Gate Pa, Tauranga and the Bush campaign? Where was the church when Te Papa was gifted to the crown? I ask the question, where is the church over this issue? Where was the church when Prendergast declared it a simple nullity? Where was the church when Bryce invaded Parihaka in 1881? Where was the church in 2004 in the Foreshore and Seabird Act? Our silence is tantamount to a betrayal. As I said, there have been some odd dissenting voices, but for the most part, we have been silent. Sir William Martin, who was the chair of the CMS, said, "We have covenanted with these people. To this undertaking, the faith of the nation is pledged. The compact is binding irrevocably. We cannot repudiate it so long as we enjoy the benefit which we have gained by it." That was one of the prophetic voices. I want to talk about a difficult thing. I know this is difficult for many of us as Pākehā. When we consider that we might think that Māori are being considered special in some way. Sir William Martin said this, "We have covenanted with these people." The treaty says this in the preamble, "Her Majesty Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, regarding with her royal favour the native chiefs and tribes of New Zealand." According to the treaty, Māori are special. Fear not, we have all kinds of special categories, mothers, fathers, elders, widows. In their own unique way, tangata whenua, according to the treaty, are special. At a hui in 1989, Sir Eddie Jury, speaking to a gathering of rangatira, said this. So speaking to his own people, speaking to Māori, he said, "We must not also forget that the treaty is not just a Bill of Rights for Māori, it's a Bill of Rights for Pākehā too. It is a treaty that gives Pākehā the right to be here. Without the treaty, there would be no lawful authority for the Pākehā presence in this part of the South Pacific. We must remember that if we are the tangata whenua, the original people, then the Pākehā are the tangata tiriti. To honour our forebears then, we as Māori must never challenge, threaten, compromise or prejudice the rights of Pākehā to be here. We cannot claim our own rights if we do not first respect those of others." I would actually add to that, not only is it for Pākehā, it's for whoever enters through the waha o te tiriti o Waitangi. Whatever later settlers, wherever you come from, if you enter into this land through that door, you are tangata tiriti. So, where does that lead us? Tangata tiriti are special people too. We have our own specialness. We are given an identity as tangata tiriti. We are given a tūranga waiwai, a place to stand. May I say that this is a deep, deep privilege in a colonised land. There are not many Western nations that enjoy this privilege of actually being recognised as a people of the land in the way of tangata tiriti by belonging to the treaty. We are a special people. We just have to enjoy our specialness in its own unique way. So for the nerds among, I've put this down here, and I'm going to read it, and it might just go over top of your heads, and kei te pai tēnā. But you could come back to this at another time, because I'm wanting us to know, what is it, before we become experts at exegesis of Article 2 and Article 3, etc. The treaty is a divinely inspired reconciliatory covenant, a Tatau Pounamu. It recognises the specialness of Māori as the first people of the land, the tuakana. The treaty is a gift from Māori via the Crown to all later settlers who live in this land of Aotearoa, New Zealand, via this portal, and recognises their specialness as tangata tiriti, as te teina. It lays a just, equitable, and aspirational foundation for a nation. The treaty covenant is analogous to a marriage between tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, a sacred protocol which carries concomitant rights and responsibilities, enabling two interdependent peoples to coexist as one. So that's a work in progress, but that's kind of my latest place where I'd stand. And now we're coming down into the landing. I just want to compliment you on just how well that you're doing tonight. Reconciliation, and hopefully not reconciliation. Okay, how do we do it? What's it about? Well, again, hopefully not to sort of make too strong a point of it. The scriptures come up with some examples that are quite helpful. There's a story in the Old Testament called the Gibeonite Treaty, and it tells a story about how a Gibeonite tribe made a treaty with the Israelites. So they made that treaty. 400 years later, the Israelites broke the treaty. The scriptures record that God sent a famine into the land. King David, who was king at the time, inquired of God and said, "Oh, what's the story with this famine?" And God said, "Go and ask the Gibeonites because you have broken the treaty." In simple terms, he goes to the Gibeonites and he asks this question. So you can use it as a metaphor or reality, however you want, because I think the point is this. David goes to the Gibeonites and he says to them, "What must I do, or what must we do to be reconciled with you?" I think that's a profound question. The perpetrator goes to the offended party and says, "What does reconciliation look like to you?" Not what I'm telling you is reconciliation, which has been so much of the Crown's protocol since 1975, 1985, and saying this is our reconciliatory endeavour, take it or leave it. My supervisor at Waikato once told me that, that colonisation, I've got it written up there, beautiful quote, is not just a past reality, but it's a present reality. Moana Jackson, speaking to his moko about Te Tiriti, said this. He said, "It's a mountain that will never move." I call it actually an inconvenient truth for many of us. It's not going anywhere. It's staying among us. So the first step of reconciliation, in my view, is actually return to the covenant. Acknowledge the covenant. Honour the covenant. Whatever that might mean in terms of our own internal workings, either as individuals, as a whānau, as a council, as an institution. Just recognise it as this thing that needs to be recognised, even if we approach it and say, "I don't really understand it all." In fact, that's quite possible, but we actually can apply ourselves and say, this is something that needs to be honoured. The second one is this, what I call reconciliation by relationship. Just figure these things. Māori loss of land, 6% possibly left within Māori ownership, loss of language, loss of culture, loss of autonomy. I know we're seeing some renaissance, it's true, but it's a hard yaka renaissance. Kingi Tāwhiao said this, "I rero whenua atu me hoki whenua mai." It's land that was taken. It's land that must be returned. I'm not telling you what we need to do, I'm just telling you some of the things I hear as I go around the motu. So I'm not wanting to be definitive, but these are just some of the things I hear. Matiki Mai says that we need constitutional transformation. Recently at the Hui a Motu, before he died, Kingi Tuheitia says, let's not worry about the principles, let's just stick with the treaty. In my view, what's happening in Parliament right now is totally inappropriate with regards to the place to discuss the treaty. The place for discussing the treaty needs to be in wānanga like this. We need to have wānanga all up and down the motu, that especially my people who are Johnnican latelys can come into the conversation, get up to speed, and then begin to perhaps talk about across the table, what does the treaty mean? We have to ask the question that my daughter doesn't like me asking. She doesn't like me proposing this one because she feels like it's not right for the perpetrator to talk about forgiveness. I understand what she's saying in that. I just offer this to you, and let's just see.
Taranaki whānui ki te upoko tika stands together on this historic occasion, united with our tupuna in their tireless efforts and struggles, in pursuit of recognition and settlement of the injustices perpetrated upon our people. Recognizing the immeasurable contribution of all those who've gone before us, we pay tribute to their enduring spirit through the decades when challenging and contesting the actions of the Crown. We have suffered loss and deprivation of our lands, possessions, and opportunities, together with transgressions upon our mana and tino rangatiratanga. Whakapapa reminds us that what happened in the past is an integral part of who we are today. We honour previous generations who worked hard to right the wrongs that were done. The Crown's unreserved apology and its sorrow that it has not always lived up to its obligations give Taranaki whānui ki te upoko te ika confidence that justice and balance can be restored in order to build a better future for this and generations to come. We acknowledge that the Crown seeks to atone for its past wrongs and to restore its honour and begin the process of healing. We accept the Crown's commitment to act in good faith, and we look to building a relationship of mutual trust and cooperation in the future. For too long, our history has been a troublesome burden. It is now time to set the record straight. We acknowledge and forgive the Crown for its breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles. We acknowledge and forgive the Crown for its failure to protect our interests in the acquisition and administration of our lands. We acknowledge and forgive the Crown for its actions which caused hurt and prejudice for Taranaki whānui ki te upoko te ika. We acknowledge and accept the Crown's profound regret for the significant impact on our social, economic, cultural, and spiritual well-being. Taranaki whānui ki te upoko o te ika have exercised kaitiakitanga, manakitanga, and whanaungatanga over many decades in the capital city of our nation, and recognise with the Crown this added special dimension in our relationship. We share the Crown's desire to forge a relationship based on mutual trust for the well-being of all people. And now it is finished.
That was location specific. That was people specific. That was situationally specific. But at the end of the day, that is the goal of reconciliation, that ultimately that we might find a place around the table of grace and forgiveness. I'm finishing with this to say that, in my view, there's still a lot of work to be done in even understanding the treaty. In my view, we need a hermeneutic of love, an interpretation of love, otherwise we get an arid legalism. It needs to be a relational solution, so it's kanohi ki te kanohi. This is not just a legal document that the Crown makes up the rules. There are questions still to be answered about partnership, principles, sovereignty, democracy, itamia. We need to answer, how does tangata pacifica fit into this whole thing? All that to say is it's an ongoing thing. But there are some certainties. He kawana te tēnā. The treaty is a fragile gift to us as a nation. It's a taonga. It's a gift. There are many in our land who are now treaty weary, and even some of the young are becoming hopeless around it. One young Māori friend of mine said, when I asked her about what she thinks about the treaty, she said, "It's never done anything for me." And I understood something of a hopelessness that was in her being about it. I talked about the idea that the treaty is like a marriage covenant. If we're talking about marriage covenants, we also need to talk about divorce. There needs to be an understanding that what happens when you have a partner that abuses another one consistently and over years. We have to face the reality. Even though Moana Jackson says it's a mountain that will never move, I'm coming to understand it in these latter years as a fragile taonga. And we need to take care of this beautiful gift that is in our midst. Kia tūpato. Let me finish with this prophetic speech from Whakahuihua Verko at Waitangi in 1990. It's a long time ago, but I believe it still stands in its relevance and in its power. He said to the Queen in her last visit there, he said to her, I want to quote from Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. It is much more expressive in Māori, and I take liberties with the scripture. He te tahi o ngā wahi o Waitangi noho ana tātou I reira. E tangi ana tātou ka mahara kia hiro. By the waters of Waitangi we sat down and we cried when we remembered Zion. Some of us have come here to celebrate, some to commiserate, some to commemorate, but some to remember what happened on this sacred ground. We have come to this sacred ground because our tupuna left us this ground. 150 years ago, a compact was signed. A covenant was made between two peoples, a unique and unusual circumstance. But since the signing of the treaty 150 years ago, I want to remind our partner that you have marginalised us. You have not honoured the treaty. We have not honoured each other in the promises that we have made in this sacred ground. Since 1840, the partner that has been marginalised is me. The language is yours. The custom is yours. The media by which we tell the whole world is yours. What I came here for is to renew ties that made us a nation in 1840. I don't want to debate the treaty. I don't want to renegotiate the treaty. I want the treaty to stand firm as the unity, the means by which we are one nation. As I remember the songs of our land, as I remember the history of our land, I weep here on the shores of the Bay of Islands. May God grant us the courage to be honest with one another, to be sincere with one another, and above all to love one another in the strength of God. So I come to the waters of Waitangi to weep for what could have been a unique document in the history of the world of Indigenous people with the Pākehā, and I still have the hope that we can do it. Let us sit and listen to one another. There's a covenant in the land. It's time to restore the mana of the crown It's time to restore the mana of Te Iwi Māori. It's time to restore the mana of the church and the mana of the tiriti, the Treaty of Waitangi. Toi tū te kupu, toi tū te kawanata, toi tū te tiriti. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kai taku huia, kai manawa, kura matahi apo. Rongo tonu ana i tō karanga, ka tahi te koingo. Korihi ana ngā raukura o te wā, tomo ki atu te uru tapu nui. Tapu te rongo, tiori mai tō reo roreka mai te tihi o te tōtara. Kai taku huia, kai manawa, kura matahi apo. Rongo tonu ana i tō karanga, ka tahi te koingo. Ko atu au kia koe i te koawa, tūtaki ke ki te manu huna. Tapu te rongo, korowhia mai ana hei hoa haere. Tukua tō reo I hirangaranga ki te ngahere. I ere mai te tini o te haku turi. Tō iri mai tō rongo mai whiti, kia wai atatia. Tā kiri mai ko te ata, ka watea. Kei taku huia, kai manawa, kura matahi apo. tonu ana i tō karanga. Ka tahi te koingo.
E tō mātou matua Alistair. Tēnā rā koe. I've had the great joy of accompanying you to this. This is our 6th offering of your kōrero in this way. And I've noticed that every time there are some beautiful, subtle, sometimes big changes in your kōrero. Nothing of the core, but the way you say things, the way you choose to weave things together. And I'm so inspired by that. I'm so inspired. I think you are one who wrestles with God at night. And you certainly do not die. You come and you live and you offer this life and this vision of life to us from all your wrestling. Whenever there's the night before a kaupapa, I think of you wrestling and polishing, and what a humble teacher you are, what an exemplary teacher you are, what a special man you are. And you invite us all to a very special place in this story, and in our communities and in our streets. That is what your specialness does to us, and we hear you, we're listening. We're learning to listen to these stories. Lord, have your way with us. But let me finish by saying thank you, 1,000 times thank you. And look, while I'm here, I didn't tell you I'd stay here, but I will stay here for a moment longer, because it seems that these conversations are needed. When you spoke and gave a vision of conversations up and down the motu, I thought we all felt that one. We all felt the need for that, didn't we? And so these are just a couple of ways I'd like to offer for us to at least perhaps stay engaged in this conversation in our own contexts. One, certainly, many of you have already done number one, one of 5, say, which is that you've purchased Matua Alistair's book. Beautiful, beautiful book for this Kairos moment. And as all good prophetic offerings are, I think it might be a little longer than this exact moment too. I think it'll speak with echoes long into the future. So please be welcome to purchase that. You're welcome, put it this way, if you buy 9, you get the 10th free. So there's that for you. You got 9 friends, big flex, 10 friends even. Ka pai. Another thing to note is that the team at Common Grace Aotearoa, they're a separate organisation from, say, Venn and Karuwhā, but similar-hearted. They've put together a two-part video series, 90 minutes each. It's called Belonging in This Land, Treaty Basics from a Christian Perspective. Now, it isn't as succinct and polished. In fact, it's very humble, but very for such a time as this. And you'd all make wonderful hosts, home group hosts, if you wanted to consider looking up that online, Common Grace Aotearoa, Belonging in This Land, to further these conversations at a basic level with some friends or colleagues or peers of yours. Ka pai. Point number 3 that I'd like to offer was welcome us into, was just that point on October the 24th, where Matua Alistair will speak for 10 big minutes, 10 mighty minutes on the case for the fourth article, the fourth and oral article before a select committee down in Wellington. For those of us who cannot make it to Wellington to support him and be there in person, though he'd welcome that, would we commit to praying for him? Those of us for whom that's good mahi. We know that's good mahi for us to do. October 24th. Lord, have your way there. One other thing I wanted to note as well, give me 2 more, will you? One more was just to say that if you feel that you'd love to meaningfully support these kaupapa in the form of, say, financial contribution, I can personally really back the 2 organisations here. In fact, I'd put it this way, that I have a faith as deep as mine in Jesus Christ at all, at my age now, though I was raised in it, is because of my time under Venn Fellowship's teaching. It's there, again, they talk about living wisely, aroha mai, thinking deeply, living faithfully and serving wisely here in Aotearoa, and it was that deep discipleship, honestly, that I needed. And so they do very good mahi. And it's almost like I see Karuwhā Trust as helping me put some hands and feet and flesh to that call of living and serving wisely. For indeed, Karuwhā Trust offers pilgrimages and different wānanga around the space to stay engaged and involved with and learn about and act out relationship in and do dishes in and all these types of things. So look up these 2 websites, if you will. Consider, say, a monthly donation or something like that. Know that the welcome is warm and the impact is large. Indeed, it could even mean that we get to keep doing a few more of these types of wānanga that we've had tonight. Otherwise, just real practical things. I will even firmly, here's my firmest voice, we're turning it up now, please stay for a tea and coffee and some sweet treats. Even sausage rolls, we should have led with that at the beginning. Some sausage rolls even. And home-baked cookies, truly made last night in somebody's hearth. So please stay if you'll indulge us in that, hang around. Otherwise, would I please invite our matua tamati up to pray us away, pray us into our night.
Hoi, no te mea tuatai. E mihi nei ki tō tātou rangatira I tēnei pō. I rungo hia te rongo, o mātou taringa, e tahuri atu ki aia, me ona koro rangatira mō tātou I tēnei pō. Nā te wairua I tau mai te manaakitanga ki runga I a tātou e taku rangatira ka nui te mihi atu ki a koe. Nō reira, ki ai noi tātou. E tō mātou matu nui o te rangi ki a tapu anō tō ingoa. Nei rā mātou hoa ponanga e koro piku ake ana I mui tu araro I tēnei ahi ai pō. Nei rau, tahuri ake ana o mātou e ringaringi, tēnei tō mātou rangatira. Tuku na mai ngā koro e pā katoana ki te Treaty of Waitangi. Nei rā ko mātou tēnei, e whai rapu hi ana te kawarero. E ona tikanga me ona kawe mate kia tau ki runga I a tātou katoa. Ko nei raro I te ngākau nui te aroha e huri nei ki tō tātou whenua te tātou motu me ngā rauranga tira e tau nei I runga I te mata o te whenua. Mātou wairua tapu mātou hei apu hei manaaki I te wae hoki ana mātou ki o mātou marae ki o mātou kāinga ki o mātou tamariki mokopuna. Hoi no, tuku whakapeta ana kia koe. Mō ngā hua o te mōna, mā hua o te ngāhere, me ngā hua o te tua whenua. Nei hei oranga mō mātou tinana, hei pakaro, hei pakakaha i a mātou i ngā wā katoa. Nei rā tā mātou inoi kia koe, runga i te matua te tama, me te wairua tapu, ake, āmine. Tūturu pakamaua kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e, kōkiri.